Hi everyone. I wasn't going to respond to the recent couple of requests by the Bible-thumping wingnut for atheists to comment on his channel. One was the Bible-thumping wingnut is ... and the other one was his question about certainty. I don't really see too much merit in those questions. However, I did notice that Ozzy had responded to the question on certainty, and again, I still wasn't going to comment because there's not really much for me to add to what Ozzy said. I think he covered it very, very well. But then I noticed something that Rictusgate had uploaded, and this got me to thinking that there's a little more utility in this discussion of certainty and on sort of knowing that psychological state of mind that is knowing something, to the degree that we feel we're certain of. So to get back to the first question, again, Ozzy covered it very well. He's talking about, what does certainty have to do with knowledge in a basic epistemic sense? And really, the question is, are you certain of that? When it comes to epistemology, it doesn't do us much good. People can be degrees of certain, and to say I'm 100% certain, or to say that it has been revealed to me in such a way that I can know it for certain, doesn't give us any real practical application. It doesn't get you closer to the goal. And I'll give a pro tip to the presuppositional apologists out there who are frustrated at the notion that atheists will put forward that the presuppositional apologetic, this sort of cyclone version that's put forth here on YouTube, is dishonest or disingenuous. That's kind of the rub. You're using certainty to smuggle in certitude, right? You're acting as though you have absolute knowledge, and you're smuggling that in via certainty. And of course, claims of certainty. And of course, the uninitiated, the people who don't think about these things all that deeply, are easily swayed by that. So you're asking for an atheist to account for logic, reason, rationality, and then you say, while providing no further accounting for it than your opponent has, it has been revealed to me in such a way that I can know it for certain. And as I've said many, many times here on my channel, you might be able to have some things revealed to you, but that does not mean that having certainty means that an absolute truth was revealed to you. It doesn't necessarily go the other way. And this is why people think that the presuppositional apologetic is disingenuous, because you're smuggling a few things in there and hoping no one will notice with this sort of bravado. Further to that, I think it was interesting, it was kind of cute to see that the Bible-thumping wingnut took one of my videos recently and he played it back with a little cartoon of I guess, an atheist putting some dynamite near the edge of a cliff, and then he's the guy blowing himself up. And he had my audio, and he cut me off right before I was about to make an important point. And again, this is where people start to feel like you're being disingenuous when you do things like that, because the point that I was making was neither one of us are questioning that I can use logic and reason and rationality. Not the theist and not myself. My worldview or my belief set accounts for logic and reason and rationality. And so therefore we should then be able to go and have a look at the source material for the claims that they are making. Because we both agree that I've got reason on my side, then if neither one of us is contending that, then let's go and have a look at the source material. You want to do an internal critique on my worldview, I would like to do a similar expose on yours. And he made it seem as though, in the title of his video, it was something to do with, capricious black box, abandons atheism, right? So in other words, if I'm using logic and reason to analyze the Bible, Scripture, somehow I've abandoned my own worldview. No, bozo. My worldview accounts for logic, reason, and rationality. And that's why people think you're disingenuous when you continually run around doing that, right? It's fine for you to say, I am not satisfied with your accounting for logic and reason. But what you cannot do is say that I don't have a basis for it, and then to insert your own little certainty clause and say that you have accounted for it by the fact that you're certain of it. I'm sure you were probably certain at one point that Santa Claus was real. I rest my case. Now, getting to some actually practical application of this whole notion of certainty and of knowing. Rictusgate put up a video, and I'll link his and Ozzy's below. He had put up a video on a book that he's reading. I think it's by Robert Burton, and I think it's On Certainty. Let me just actually have a quick peek here and see if he put it down. On Being Certain by Robert Burton. And it's kind of interesting. He talks about this state, the psychological state of knowing things. And, we've all heard that sort of joke, if you see something that you didn't really want to see, and you'll say, some things can't be unseen. And that's kind of what the little exercise involves that Rick Disgate is going through. So he's got this paragraph, and if you read it, it's got a bunch of sentences strung together. And there's sense there, but there's not. Everything's sort of disjointed and hanging in the air, and it doesn't make a lot of sense, even though the sentences are all okay and everything. And then all he has to do is inject one word, and then you read that paragraph again, and suddenly it all just fits. It all makes total sense. Now, the exercise is to actually then try to put your mind back in the state beforehand. And it's very, very difficult to do. In other words, to unknow that word that made everything make sense. It's extremely difficult exercise to do. And it really got me thinking about this whole notion of once we know things and certainty as it relates to my recent experience. As some of you know, I get ocular migraines. And for those of you who don't know, I'll just briefly explain my symptoms, and then I can go on. So I will typically get a blind spot in my vision. That's my first symptom. And it's almost as if you took a rearview mirror from a truck, a really big rearview mirror, and put a diagonal crack across it, and then bent the two pieces inwards together just a little bit. What would happen is you'd be able to see, but there'd be a spot there where you're missing information. It's not a hole like a black spot or a white spot. It's just missing information. It's just not there. And that will progress. I'll get these shimmering artifacts in my vision after a while, and then my hands will go numb. Sometimes my face and my tongue will go numb, and I can't think very well. And it's kind of scary. I've had them for most of my life. They seem to be happening more frequently lately for whatever reason I don't know. I had one on Christmas Day, and then I had one the day before yesterday. I was going into my lawyer's office to sign a bunch of paperwork, and as I was getting in the elevator, I noticed it coming on. It wasn't a particularly stressful visit to my lawyer's office. It was just some routine business, annual corporate documents for my little one-man show here, my little one-man operation. So it was nothing that I had needed to be stressed about, but for whatever reason, I got saddled with this migraine. And it was very difficult to try and sign papers when I can't even see the line I'm signing on. I can't really even see the pen that I'm holding. Fortunately, my wife works at this lawyer's office, and she was able to scuttlebutt me home. And we had to go back the next day and pick up my car, and I basically just have to sleep it off. Where this comes to this whole notion of knowing and certainty that Rick Disgate was talking about is that I've noticed over the years, there's more and more anxiety when I see little glimmers or glimpses of potential migraine symptoms. So if I get a bright flash off of, bouncing off the chrome of a truck from the sun, and it hits my eye, and then I go and look at somebody, there's that little interruption in being able to visibly see their face. And I'll get this rush through me. I can sometimes even taste it, right? Like an adrenaline rush. Like, oh no, I'm getting, it's an anxiety, almost a little bit of a panic attack, and I have to really work to calm myself down. I had one on Saturday. I went for breakfast with some friends of mine. We were just hanging out there, and I went and looked outside, and then I looked at my friend, and I couldn't see half of his face for an instant. And that knowing hit me like a rush, and I had to excuse myself. I had to go outside. I had to sort of stretch around and breathe and almost sort of rub my face, to try and push that away, and it never materialized into anything. And there are other symptoms as well that lead me to the same place. And so what I've found over the years, I'm 46 now, I've had an increasing number of incidents that will lead me to that anxiety of the migraines as I've sort of in some ways become more and more familiar with the symptoms of my migraines. And so it's almost like that word is being inserted there, except that it's being inserted in places where it doesn't belong. And I'm seeing patterns where they don't necessarily exist because there's so much anxiety around having these migraines. They're scary, they're completely disruptive. You can't do anything when you're having them. And so it's not something a person wants. And so this is an area where that knowing, that certainty can actually lead to problems. Of course, Ozzy mentioned in his video the Dunning-Kruger effect, and I think that's something that any presuppositional apologist would do well to familiarize themselves with and understand that certainty in and of itself is not a component, for a sound epistemic basis. But it can also, that certainty can also cause us a lot of problems. We can be certain and be wrong and have disastrous effects, or in my case, inconvenient effects, where I'll be sitting here, talking to a customer, and I'll catch some kind of an anomaly in my vision or something, and then all of a sudden I feel it coursing through me. I get very socially anxious because really I just want that person to go away now, because I'm concerned that I'm actually in the throes of the beginning, the onset of a migraine, and I just want them to go away so I can be alone with myself. And I'm a social person, so it's not, it's something that kind of cramps my style in that sense, and of course running a business as well. And so that's gotten me to really thinking as to whether or not I could devise or develop some sort of a method, some sort of tools, some sort of a procedure to work on ridding myself in some ways of that anxiety through those little cues. If there's a way to unlearn the word, in this case, referencing the Richtersgate book example, how could I unlearn some of these things? And I'm not sure it's possible. It just may be that I need to do, breathing exercises, and I need to work on calming myself down when I see those little glimpses, those little glimmers of migraine onset anomalies, that actually aren't, that actually may not be what I feel like they are. So anyway, I thought it was interesting to note, these aren't the same kinds of certainty exactly, but they do involve this psychological state of mind. And, of once you know things, or of knowing things the way we do psychologically, not epistemically, of course. And as it relates again to the Bible-thumping wingnuts question, I would actually, I don't know, I've never been in the camp that said, yeah, I could be wrong about everything I claim to know. I think that's silliness, and not to berate anyone who has answered in that fashion in the past. I just think that it's an attempt to be overly intellectually honest on the part of the atheist answering the question, and that's being capitalized upon by the presuppositional apologist, who then injects his own certainty and says, well, I'm certain about a whole bunch of things, as if that somehow fits the bill. And then, of course, if the atheist in the Seitan-Bruggencate tradition, if the atheist were to try to make some other knowledge claim, including how can, I don't think you can be certain that God exists. Well, could you be wrong about that? Of course, so it's something that lends itself towards being called disingenuous. And I think as a presuppositional apologist, if you can't see that, I think you really need to look much more carefully and much more honestly at your approach. And this whole claim of certainty, it wouldn't be dishonest if you weren't using it as a tool the way that you are, in an attempt to dress it up and make it appear as though it were absolute knowledge. Thanks everyone for watching.